Hey, welcome back, guys. So, in the last video, we talked about non-primitive data types and we specifically looked at arrays and objects. Okay, so now we want to talk about loops. So, loops is very interesting because it is where the fun part is. So, imagine you want to count from 1 to 10. Sure, you can do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What if you want to count from 1 to 200? Maybe that's also possible. What if you want to count from 1 to 10,000? Or you want to count from 1 to, say, a million or 10 million? It becomes really impossible for you to do that manually. So that is where loops come in. You give computers instruction to do things repeatedly. So you give computer instruction to do things repeatedly, and each time they do it, they output a slightly different result. So that's what loops are, and computers are really good at that because they are designed for things like that. So let's say you want to send an email to all the users in a database, and let's say the users have, the database has tens of thousands of users or even millions of users. Okay, so loops come in handy for such tasks. So let's talk about how you would implement it. So we just talked about counting. So let's see how we can use loops to make the computer count from 1 to 10, or let's say 1 to 100. So let's do that. Now, there are a couple of ways to write loops in JavaScript, but we're going to focus on one kind of loop called for loop. And for the most cases, this is usually all you need to do loops, right? Maybe in the future, we're going to talk about other ways to loop through arrays or objects that is not for loop, but for the most part, for loop can help you solve most of the looping problems. So let's see the syntax for loop. You start with the for keyword, okay, and then actually let's put it here so you know exactly what I'm talking about. For loop. Okay, so you start with the for keyword, and then you there are a number of parameters to specify that will define the condition for the loop, because if you want to give someone instruction to do something repeatedly, so you want to give the person instructions like this is where you start and this is the actual thing you need to do and this is where you stop, right? So that is what we are going to specify here. First of all, we need to specify the starting point. So we want to count from 1 to 100. Where do you want to start from? 1. Okay, we might as well just count from 0 to 100. So but let's start counting from 1. So we say let I 1. Okay, so I will represent the current count. Okay, so that's what I is. So when we are doing our first count, I is 1. Second count, I is 2. So we say let I equal to 1. So we're starting from 1. Secondly, we want to specify when to stop. So we're gonna continue as long as I is less than, we're going to count as long as I is less than or equal to 100, because we want to count from 1 to 100. So we'll say I less than or equal to 100. That is the second parameter. And finally, we're going to specify our count. So are we going to count 1? Are we going to count in 1? Are we going to count in 2? Are we going to count in 5? Are we going to count in 20? So basically, we're going to say I plus plus. So this is going to count in 1. So basically, it's saying add 1 to the current iteration, so that you move to the next count. Okay, so this is it. Now next, we want to say what actually happened. So what we've done is the parameters, the looping parameters. We want to specify what actually happens. So what we want to do is to just console.log, and then we do I. Okay, so let's take a look in our console. Cool. So we counted from 1 to 100. So you can imagine, if I want to count from 1 to 1 million, what do you think I'll do? Or 1,000, what do you think I'll do? I'll increase this. So make this say 1,000. So you see, counting from 1 to 1,000. And I can always increment by whatever number I want, not just 1. So let's say I want to count in 2s. So what I can do here is to say I equal I plus 2, and I save that. So I'm going to get 246 up to 1,000. Why didn't this? Oh, actually started from 1. Yeah, because I started from 1, I'm getting 1, 3, 5, 7. Okay, that's cool. So I can start from 2, so I get like 2, 4, 6, 8, and this is it. So just showing you how you can tweak these different parameters to get different results. Or maybe what you want to do is not add, maybe what you want to do is multiply. So now remember that you can't just put any operator here. For instance, if you're going to do multiply, make sure that the initial count is not 0, because if the initial count is 0, 0 multiplied by anything is always going to be 0. So this will never be able to go to the next iteration, and you will run into something called infinite loop. Infinite loop is where the computer keeps on iterating, and it keeps on the loop keeps running because it's not moving forward. There is nothing to stop it. It's not meeting the condition that will stop it. So always be very, very careful to avoid that. And the way you stop an infinite loop is to make sure that, first of all, there is a stop condition, and we have a stop condition here. It says stop as long as I is equal to or less than 1,000. So once after counting 1,000, the loop stops. Secondly, we need to know what I currently is. So I is currently 2. Cool. So we know that we need to be sure that I can move from that 2 to 1,000. Okay, so I is currently 2, and if I continually multiply I by 2, I know I is going to get to 1,000. But if I is 0, right, if I do the first iteration, I'll never be able to get out of the first iteration, because 0 multiplied by 2 is always going to be 0, and there is no way this loop will get to 1,000, and for that reason it will never stop. Okay, so I'm going to show you other examples of infinite loops, but let's check this out. And cool, we have it. So this is what we are doing. Remember, we are saying multiply the current iteration by 2. So we say 2 multiplied by 2 is 4, 4 multiplied by 2 is 8, 8 multiplied by 2 is 16, 16 multiplied by 2 is 32, just like that until now. The reason this didn't hit 1,000 is because if you multiply this one by 2, it's going to go more than 1,000. So that is why it stopped here. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so I must tell you, there is a lot you can do with for loop. There is so much you can do with for loop. For instance, you can take an array. We talked about array in our last class, in our last video. You can take an array and log out only the even numbers in that array. So for instance, we can say const numbers so we can say 68. Actually, let's call this scores, right? Okay, let's call this scores. So we have 68, we have 72, we have 80, or actually 89, we have 50, we have 39, we have 90, we have 45. Cool. So we have this array of numbers. Now we can say we want to log out the ones that are less than a particular number. We want to loop through this array and show the ones that are less than let's say 50. So we can say, in that case, since we are looping through an array of number, our conditions or our parameters will reflect the attributes of this array. So first we're going to say let I, because we are looping through an array and we know that the first element of an array has an index of 0. So we are going to start from 0. So we say let I equal 0. Now when are we going to stop? We're going to stop once we have iterated through all the elements of the array, and we know that the index of the last element of the array, of course we can use the index to know when we are done, because the first iteration, the index will be 1. Sorry, the index will be 0. So we know we are done when we iterate on the last element, and the index of the last element is going to always be the length of the array minus 1. So we are going to say as long as I is less than or equal to score, this is the array. So to get the length, we're going to say scores dot length. This is how we get the length of the array. Minus 1. Good. Then finally we're gonna have what we want to do. So because it's an array, we don't want to skip anyone, so we want to just be incrementing gradually. So I plus plus, so we go from index 0 to index 1 to index, just like that. So what do we want to do? We want to check if I, remember that in this case now, if you want to get the element in a particular index, remember that I is representing the index. See how we said we will get it. If you want to get an element in a particular index, I think I cleaned that. So if you want to get an element at a particular index, we can do scores. That's the element, right? We can do scores and then and then I. So basically we are saying if the element in this index, right, is less than, okay, we're looking for the ones that are less than 50. So what do we want to do? we want to say console dot log, and then we say scores, and then I. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So what we are saying is, if the element of the scores array on index I is less than 50, we want to log it out to the console. Great. So let's save this and check it out. Okay, so we have only two scores that are less than 50, and that is 39 and 45. You see, now let's do something more interesting. So we want to say we want to grade the scores. So we want to say if so what we want to log out in this case is console.log. We want to say you scored below average. So we say okay, and then we put another if statement or else if. Actually, okay, yeah, so this is fine. So we'll do else if scores is less than, so if the current iteration is greater than or equal to 50, and less than, okay, actually less than or equal to 60, 69 actually. Of course, we're gonna get this guy. So if the current iteration or if the current score, this is how you represent the current iteration. Okay, so what do you want to do? Console.log. You want to say good mark or good grade. This one we just want to say below average grade. This one we say good grade, and then finally we put an else block that will catch everything else, and we say excellent. So we say console.log, we say excellent grade. Okay, so we save that. Okay, now of course we don't have a way of knowing which score is which, so we just know that we have some good grades, you have excellent grade, you have good grade again, we have below average, you have this. Now we want to actually add the score. So when we talked about strings and variables, remember there is a way that we can, when we are adding a string, we can concat a variable. So if we want to add the grade, so we can say something like you scored. Now we want to add the actual grade here. So we can say you scored, let's say, you know what, let's do that in the next video. I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of information. Let's do that in the next video. So but the point is, you can loop through an array and output different things based on the value of each element of the array. Okay, so in the next video I want to show you something called string concatenation, and then we are going to use that knowledge to make this guy more interesting. So if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the comment section and I'll respond to you. All right, I'll see you in the next video.